We have some of the worst reproductive numbers that we've had in recorded history. Now, some of this is going to be choice in different Western countries, but the amount of people that are trying to get pregnant, aren't able to, and going through IVF sort of treatments and other sorts of fertility treatments is going up. And we look at hormonal health, and obviously this is tied up with that as well. We have the testosterone levels in men is the lowest in recorded history. There was an article, as you can see here, called that said, "You're not half the man your grandfather was," and that was from the early 2000s, where they recorded and measured the testosterone levels of men in their 20s and compared them to men in their 60s from the 1970s, and they found that the men in their 60s in the 1970s had twice the level of testosterone of 20-something-year-old men in the 2000s. So they said, "You're not half the man your grandfather was." And you can see here as well, you see this massive decline in testosterone levels as well. But what about women? Fertility rates are going down significantly. PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is now being called type 4 diabetes. Alzheimer's is being called type 3 diabetes. That's because your brain is not getting an appropriate amount of glucose, and you get insulin resistance of, again, your brain is part of your body, just as we've sort of reiterated here several times today in talks. And so because it's part of your body, you can get insulin resistance for your brain as well as the rest of your body. And we actually see this on PET CTs. We actually see that there's lower uptake of glucose in the brain on PET CT with people with Alzheimer's. Right. And so what's happening is over the years, you're getting less and less energy in, your brain is just decaying and atrophying, amongst other sorts of things as well, I think are contributory. When you switch over to a ketogenic diet and your ketones go up, that doesn't require insulin, that bypasses that process, goes directly into your brain, it lights up, because 2/3 of your brain, including your cortex, primarily run on ketones. Why do I say that when everybody says, "Oh, you have to have a certain amount of glucose"? Well, first of all, when you're in ketosis, you make glucose. So problem solved. But in fact, 2/3 of your brain prefer ketones, because when you have an adequate amount of ketones and you have an adequate amount of glucose, those parts of your brain will only run on the ketones. So even though you have an abundance of glucose, just puts it to the side. So that's preference. It's only when those ketones start coming down that you start replacing that with glucose. So that's a preference. That's a primary energy source. And then ketones cross the blood-brain barrier. This is especially important for kids and elderly adults, because your brain requires fat to grow and rebuild and repair itself, and ketones cross the blood-brain barrier and reconstitute into fatty acids. And that is used as the physical matrix of your brain. So type 3 diabetes being Alzheimer's, type 4 diabetes being PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the leading cause of female-driven infertility. And this is largely, again, because of our friend insulin. You eat carbohydrates, insulin goes up. Insulin controls about 100 different, actually more than 100 different mechanisms in your body besides glucose control. And so when you have it at a nice normal level, when you're fasting or just not eating carbohydrates, it's affecting everything at that nice low level. Call it a 5. You eat a pasta or bread or something like that, jumps up to 35. Now you're affecting everything at a 35. So everything's way out of balance. And one of them is your hormones, because PCOS can be caused by insulin resistance. That's why it's called type 4 diabetes. Insulin blocks the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. Women make testosterone first, and then that's converted into estrogen in the ovaries. So insulin blocks that. So you get too much testosterone and not enough estrogen, and you get PCOS. And you can put on weight, you can get facial hair, body hair, things like that, other sorts of things that you see with too much testosterone. And then you're infertile and you don't get your cycles properly, just like you'd see with someone with insufficient amount of estrogen. And that accounts for nearly 40% of the infertility issues. And you have uterine factors, things like uterine fibroids. Those are also largely caused by insulin resistance. People that go on ketogenic diets actually find they have shrinkage of their fibroids quite consistently. So that seems to be influenced by insulin as well. So what about diabetes? So this is a growing problem. And this unfortunately, these statistics only go to 2006, was sort of the best graph I could get. But you see this massive spike, since it's sort of slowly creeping up. Then you hit the 80s and 90s and it really starts going up, right? what happened around that time? We started telling everybody that fat was bad, meat was bad. Okay, stop eating that. What do you replace it with? Carbs and sugar, and then seed oils, because you want the polyunsaturated fats, the unsaturated fats. Well, those ones are great for you. Okay, well, you have a massive spike in diabetes at that time. It's increased by roughly a factor of 8 since the 1980s. And it accounts for 9% of the population in the US is estimated to have type 2 diabetes, and that accounts for 75% of the Medicare budget. So it's a very expensive disease to treat, and it causes other diseases as well. 40% of America is estimated to be pre-diabetic. So ostensibly, if you don't do anything, and why would they, in 10 years or so, you could have as much as 50% of the US population or the world population, because there's similar statistics around the West, could have type 2 diabetes. What the hell is that going to do to the healthcare budget, right? So we're talking about, what about our healthcare system? Do we go public? Do we go private? It's like, that's just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, right? That's not the problem. The problem is this massive, massive growth of burden of disease. That's going to sink any ship. It doesn't matter what system you have. It's going to destroy it. And it's only getting worse. Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. So, as we were saying, heavy corporate influences that have pushed the scale in one direction. Kellogg's cereal was founded in the early part of the 20th century, late 19th century, by Dr. Kellogg, who was a Seventh-day Adventist church member. I did a whole talk on this on the last Regenerate conference that people may have seen. People can look up online, called The Corruption of Our Medical and Nutritional Guidelines. But suffice it to say that they have a religious bent on getting rid of meat. They think that it's sinful, it causes lust, and lust is a sin, and therefore meat is a sin, so we should all stop that. And that's, their want, whatever they want to believe is fine, but they're trying to force this on everybody else. And so Kellogg's was of this opinion, and he started making meat alternatives like Kellogg's Corn Flakes and other sort of nut meat sort of alternatives as well to sort of replace meat as well. And he wasn't hiding this. He said this is in order to reduce your lustful desires and things like that. He was very clear about that. And then this sort of thing took a life of its own, and this big processed food empire has grown out because of that. But that's where it started. Sanitarium Foods here in Australia, it's still owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They've never paid taxes. They have tax-exempt status. And the problem is that they make trillions, as we discussed. Maybe not every year, but they're multi-billion-dollar enterprise. And now they're in control of the narrative because they're pumping out tons and tons of money, pushing that narrative about plant-based food being the best, meat being bad. Well, that supports two of their posts, which is their religious ideology and also now their financial investments and ties. So that's not what you want. You don't want people that are pushing out their agenda on people because of their own ideologies or their own financial motives. The big problem with that is that they didn't invade and buy off the nutritional academies. They invented them. They founded them. There's a Seventh-day Adventist church member named Lena Cooper, Leena Cooper, and she was all about plant-based. She founded the American Nutritional and Dietetics Association, and she wrote the first textbook taught in university courses in nutrition. As far as I know, it's still in print, and its current iteration, its current edition, is still being taught in Ivy League schools in America. Sally Norton said that one of her textbooks at Cornell University was that book. I think it was the 44th edition. And so they didn't just invade the institutions. They are the institutions. We talk about the man behind the curtain. They're like 3 curtains back, right? So that's a problem. They're also pumping out the majority of the research, right? So all the evidence on nutrition, nutritional research, it's largely funded by industry. Coca-Cola alone spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research than the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, right? So this is the mass majority of studies coming out in nutrition specifically comes from the exact people that we should never listen to, the people with an agenda who want to sell a product or push an ideology on us. So you have to be very careful. This is, people talk about, oh, where's the study? Where's the study? Where's the study? That's not science. That's academia. That's just publishing things for the sake of publishing things. Science is observation and looking what happens in the real world situations and then designing studies to try to extrapolate more meaning out of that. But if you have a study that tells you that rocks fly and you throw a rock and it falls, I don't care what your study says. It's just the observed fact is that you're wrong. And when I, as a doctor and a clinician, I go against those guidelines and do something else, and I see the exact opposite results of what someone says, I'm going to trust my real world experiences and what happens to my actual patients in the real world than any study. And now we know why, because this isn't even academia at this point. This is just marketing. These studies are not someone publishing this because they think, wow, look, I found this out. This is a directed, targeted approach to sell a product and push an ideology. They're not the only ones. There's a big profit motivation in this. Obviously, the drug companies make a lot. These investment companies make a lot. Goldman Sachs had a slide leaked from one of their meetings that said, is curing patients a sustainable business model? The answer to that, of course, is no, because if you just cure someone, then the problem's gone. You give them medicine once and that's it. Just again, going back to the drug dealer metaphor, the money is on the return customer. You get them addicted and now they're dependent and they have to keep coming back. Who is more dependent? Someone who does cocaine or someone who requires blood pressure medication and something to keep down their rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's and gout and all these sorts of things. They are beholden to these drug companies or else they will get very sick. They're not even having fun with it. They're just not dying, right? So, it's a pretty horrible sort of drug dealer relationship, if you ask me. But so they're not interested in curing disease. That's what doctors used to be about, was curing disease, getting people better. We did that. The last thing we cured was polio, right? And they're still mad about all the money they lost on polio. They don't cure anything now, right? It's just about the treatment, just treating symptoms, and that's it. And they go, well, we just don't know what's causing it. That's because you're not looking for it. So it's a product development market, and they're not going to look for a product that will just run itself out, right? It's like planned obsolescence in cars. They used to make cars that just last forever, decades and decades. Now they don't. They are designed to break down so that you get scheduled repair and maintenance and that you have to replace your car, right? It's the same with medicine now too. They're trying to just keep you coming back for more. So we just need to know that, right? That's fine. That's their motivation. Our motivation is being well and healthy. So we don't look to them for cures. We look at other means for cures, right? So we do our own research and look into this. And of course, don't do your own research, just listen to experts. There's one of the oldest sayings in the world is you keep people ignorant, you keep them under control. So don't listen to anybody that says don't do your own research. That's called being educated, right? That's called looking things up and reading books, right? So anybody who tells you not to do that is clearly not your friend. There was even a whistleblower that came out, and he worked in big pharma, and he said that there was one of these executives from the pharmaceutical companies that said, asked a rhetorical question, well, you know what my favorite drug is that our company makes? And you'd hope they'd say something like something that cures childhood leukemia or something like that. And he said, no, my favorite drug that our company makes are any drugs that have side effects that we have other drugs that treat. Because that's how their heads work. They just want money. They don't care about your suffering. In fact, they're happy for you to suffer more so that they can sell you more drugs. They're sick people. So the editor of the Lancet Journal, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, is a guy named Dr. Horton, Richard Horton. he made a whole big statement, and he's not the only one. The editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine, also probably the most prestigious medical journal in history, they both came out and said that basically medical research is unreliable at best or completely fraudulent. And they said at least half falls into this category. And that's because big pharmacy and big food, they falsify and manipulate tests in order to get the result that they want, to push their product and say that it's not only safe, but good for you. And this was reiterated by many, many, many other editors and scientists of note, like John Ioannidis from Stanford, who's one of the most cited researchers of all time. And he said that these studies are basically garbage, and you just cannot trust them because, again, even if they were just honestly done, that's still academia. That's not science, but they're not even that. This is marketing and propaganda at this point. That's the vast majority of this stuff. Okay, so we need to get back to treating what healthcare was designed for. It used to be that we had very specific things that we used to treat before the rise of the non-communicable diseases. And those were things like injuries, pregnancy and childbirth, congenital and genetic disorders, which much lower. There's very rare infectious diseases that accounted for a lot more, and malnutrition, people not getting enough to eat, different sorts of vitamin deficiencies, pellagra, beriberi, these sorts of things. And then toxicities and poisonings. You get exposed to lead. People got sick for that for centuries before they figured out what the hell that was. Or poison scorpions or snake bites or these sorts of things, right? Now we're dealing with these NCDs, and that, again, accounts for 90% of what we see as doctors on a day-to-day basis and 90% of the deaths in the Western world. But that's actually just these last two. It's malnutrition and toxicity. We're not getting proper nutrition. We're not getting the nutrients that we require for our brain and our body and our proper development. Jalal spoke about the misdevelopment of the jaws and teeth. We saw that immediately after agriculture. Everywhere we went, when people went from predominantly meat to predominantly plants, the height and health of populations declined every single time. Brains decreased by 11% for adult men, 17% for adult women. Jaws became smaller, teeth became more crowded and crooked, and we started having all these sort of dentition issues, signs of poor wound healing, of malnourishment, as well as tuberculosis in the spines and bones of these skeletons. That did not happen before agriculture. Immediately after they found that. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. And then toxicities, this toxic buildup of a species inappropriate diet, eating things that have no business being in our body, and I would include every and all plants in that, right? To different degrees, right? But there are toxins in plants, and we don't have as good of defenses against them as other animals do. But even those other animals that only eat plants, they only eat very specific plants because they have defenses for those plants. And so you don't see animals eating outside of their biological design and staying healthy. And so if an animal eats a certain plant, it needs to just eat those plants. If it eats outside of that, it can get very sick. And in veterinary medicine, we have a lot of diseases named for this: big head, big tongue, limp neck, crazy cow syndrome. Those are all diseases, but they all are named for diseases of a toxicity. The animal, the cow, that eats a plant that it's not supposed to eat. Normally, you don't see this in the wild. Because they just keep walking. They don't just eat any random thing. But if you're stuck in a pasture and you sort of run out of food because you're out of neglect or something like that, then they might eat plants that they normally wouldn't, and they get these issues and sicknesses and diseases, right? So we know that in the animal population. We know that a malnourishment disease that happens in cows is muscular dystrophy. Cows get muscular dystrophy, and it's the exact same disease as human muscular dystrophy from what I understand. But they figured out that it's actually a selenium deficiency. And so you give these cows selenium and it goes away, or it just never happens in the first place, right? Has anyone ever asked if our muscular dystrophy in our children is from a deficiency like from selenium or anything else? I would try to encourage and challenge anybody here that deals with muscular dystrophy, or anybody watching this recording who treats muscular dystrophy or children in general, to ask that question and maybe check their selenium, check other sorts of nutrients. We also know that we're getting malnourished because our reference ranges are getting lower and lower and lower for all these different nutrients. So people think you go to your doctor and they check your B12 or your folate or something like that, and they say, okay, well, it's in this range, that's good, right? Oh, no, now it's too high, that's bad. It's too low, oh, that's bad, right? Why is that? Because they're saying that reference range is the optimal range for optimal health. But that's not what that range is. That range is the average for the community. And that's why every single lab has different reference ranges all over the world. That's because they have a different reference range population. So we need to look at the actual ranges for good health, and those are very different. And so you will actually see, if this would revolutionize medicine overnight, if you just actually use reference ranges that actually denoted actual health. And doctors would see just the whole, several pages of just red numbers, like, oh my God, you'd have to do something, right? Now they're looking, oh, no, everything's fine. No, you're fine. They're not fine. They're malnourished. They have low testosterone. They have low estrogen. They have other sorts of dyscrasias, and that they're just not being picked up because everyone is getting it. And so those reference ranges are changing. But if you look at actual health, you'll see this very clearly. So we're getting malnourished and we're getting poisoned. And I think that's the beginning and end of most of these chronic diseases. Many other autoimmune conditions, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, Graves' disease, lupus. We have a few patients with rheumatoid arthritis and even multiple sclerosis. And these are all improving dramatically with just these dietary changes, just eating a more typically appropriate diet for human beings. Cancer. I don't treat cancer directly, but I do help people if they want to investigate ketogenic metabolic therapy for cancer. It's something I've been involved with in the research side of things with Professor Thomas Seyfried in America, and given some lectures on. But we